OMG. Your soulmate cut someone off after finding out this about you? Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because before your soulmate made the decision to distance themselves from someone, something unexpected happened. Something they never planned for. Something they never saw coming. Something that completely changed the way they viewed the situation. And listen to this. The day began like any other. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that suggested a major realization was about to appear. Your soulmate was focused on their own life. Their own responsibilities. Their own goals. Their own plans. Everything felt normal. Predictable. Routine. Yet sometimes the most important moments arrive disguised as ordinary ones. Because your heart needs this right now, because life rarely announces its turning points ahead of time. Your soulmate had no idea a turning point was approaching. And listen to this. Later that day, they found themselves talking with someone they trusted. A casual conversation. Nothing serious at first. Just the usual exchange of thoughts and opinions. The kind of conversation people have every day. For a while, everything felt harmless. The topics changed naturally. One subject led to another. One story led to another. Then suddenly something unexpected happened. Your name entered the conversation. And the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly. But enough for your soulmate to notice. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes a single moment reveals more about people than years of observation. Your soulmate was about to witness one of those moments. And listen to this. At first, they simply listened. Quietly. Patiently. Observing. The other person began sharing opinions. Sharing impressions. Sharing conclusions. Speaking with confidence. Speaking as though they understood everything. Yet the more they talked, the more uncomfortable your soulmate became. Not because of what was being said. Because of how it was being said. There was certainty without understanding. Judgment without context. Conclusions without curiosity. And that bothered them. Deeply. Because your heart needs this right now, because wise people understand that every story has layers. Your soulmate believed in those layers. And listen to this. The conversation continued. Minute after minute. And with every passing moment, your soulmate noticed something surprising. The person speaking seemed more interested in assumptions than truth. More interested in conclusions than understanding. More interested in appearances than reality. That realization stayed with them. Because they knew something important. Real understanding requires effort. Real understanding requires patience. Real understanding requires humility. Without those things, people often mistake assumptions for facts. Your soulmate could see that happening. Because your heart needs this right now, because not everyone takes the time to truly understand another person's story. Your soulmate valued understanding. And listen to this. As the discussion continued, they began reflecting privately. Comparing what they were hearing with what they personally believed. Comparing assumptions with observations. Comparing judgment with experience. And the differences became impossible to ignore. The more they thought about it, the clearer everything became. Some people only see what is visible on the surface. But meaningful things rarely live on the surface. Character doesn't. Growth doesn't. Wisdom doesn't. Resilience doesn't. The most important parts of a person usually exist beneath what others immediately notice. Because your heart needs this right now, because depth is often invisible to people who aren't looking for it. Your soulmate was looking deeper. And listen to this. The conversation eventually reached a point where your soulmate could no longer remain emotionally detached. Not because they were angry. Not because they wanted conflict. Because something inside them recognized a deeper truth. The truth that every person deserves to be understood before they are judged. The truth that every story deserves context. The truth that assumptions are often incomplete. And the truth that understanding matters. Those realizations began growing stronger with every passing minute. Because your heart needs this right now, because values become visible when they're tested. Your soulmate's values were being tested. And listen to this. For a while, they stayed silent. Observing. Listening. Thinking. Yet internally, they were learning something important about the person sitting across from them. Not through what they said about you. Through how they spoke about people in general. The attitude. The perspective. The willingness to assume the worst without seeking the full truth. All of it revealed something. Something difficult to ignore. Something impossible to unsee. And once your soulmate noticed it, they couldn't stop noticing it. Because your heart needs this right now, because character often reveals itself during ordinary conversations. Your soulmate was paying close attention. And listen to this. As the evening continued, another realization appeared. Perhaps the most important one so far. They realized this situation was no longer really about you. It had become about principles. About values. About the type of energy they wanted around them. The type of conversations they wanted around them. The type of people they wanted around them. And suddenly they began questioning things they had never questioned before. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes one conversation reveals truths about an entire relationship. Your soulmate was beginning to see those truths. And listen to this. The more they reflected, the clearer everything became. They weren't upset because someone had an opinion. Everyone has opinions. They were troubled because there seemed to be no desire for understanding. No curiosity. No effort to see beyond assumptions. And to your soulmate, that mattered. Because they believed people are more than a single mistake. More than a rumor. More than a misunderstanding. More than a snapshot of one moment in time. People are stories. Complex stories. Stories that deserve patience. Stories that deserve compassion. Stories that deserve honesty. Because your heart needs this right now, because meaningful connections are built on understanding, not assumptions. Your soulmate knew that. And listen to this. As the conversation finally came to an end, they walked away with a feeling they couldn't ignore. A feeling that something important had just been revealed. Not about you. About the person they had been talking to. About the way that person viewed others. About the way that person approached understanding. And the more your soulmate reflected on it, the more certain they became that a major decision was approaching. A decision that would surprise even them. A decision based not on anger. Not on drama. But on values. Values they were no longer willing to compromise. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the biggest decisions begin with the smallest realizations. Your soulmate had just experienced one of those realizations. And as they looked back on the conversation later that night, one thought refused to leave their mind. When someone shows you how they view other people, pay attention. Because eventually, that same perspective will reveal who they truly are. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after the conversation ended, your soulmate couldn't stop thinking about what they had heard. Most people would have forgotten about it. Most people would have moved on. Most people would have treated it like just another conversation. But something about it stayed with them. Something about it felt important. And listen to this. As the evening became quieter, they replayed the discussion in their mind. Every comment. Every opinion. Every assumption. Every conclusion. The more they reflected, the more one question kept appearing. Why did that conversation bother me so much? At first, they thought the answer was obvious. Maybe they simply disagreed. Maybe they didn't like the tone. Maybe they felt uncomfortable with the negativity. Yet the deeper they looked, the more they realized the answer was much bigger than that. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes discomfort is actually a signal that our values are being challenged. Your soulmate's values were speaking loudly. And listen to this. The more they thought about everything, the more they noticed a pattern. The person they had been speaking with seemed completely certain about things they couldn't possibly know for sure. They spoke confidently. They spoke decisively. They spoke as though every assumption was a fact. And suddenly your soulmate realized something. Confidence and truth are not the same thing. Someone can sound certain and still be wrong. Someone can sound convincing and still misunderstand the situation completely. That realization hit them harder than expected. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom begins when we recognize the difference between assumption and understanding. Your soulmate was recognizing that difference. And listen to this. As they continued reflecting, they began thinking about you. Not about rumors. Not about opinions. Not about assumptions. About what they genuinely knew. About the qualities they had noticed. About the lessons they had learned. About the impressions that came from experience rather than speculation. And when they compared those things to what they had heard earlier, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The two pictures didn't match. One picture was built on assumptions. The other was built on observation. One picture was shallow. The other had depth. Because your heart needs this right now, because real understanding comes from experience, not guesswork. Your soulmate trusted experience. And listen to this. The realization grew stronger. For a long time, they had believed that most misunderstandings happened by accident. Now they weren't so sure. Sometimes people misunderstand because they don't have enough information. But sometimes people misunderstand because they never try to learn more. That difference mattered. A lot. Because one comes from limitation. The other comes from choice. And your soulmate was beginning to see that clearly. Because your heart needs this right now, because effort reveals character. The effort people make to understand others says a lot about who they are. And listen to this. The more they reflected, the more another truth emerged. The conversation wasn't really revealing anything about you. It was revealing something about the person speaking. Their mindset. Their perspective. Their habits. Their willingness, or unwillingness, to see beyond appearances. That realization changed everything. Suddenly the conversation felt completely different. Suddenly the focus shifted. Suddenly the real lesson became visible. Because your heart needs this right now, because people often reveal themselves while talking about someone else. Your soulmate had noticed that. And listen to this. Hours passed. Yet they kept returning to the same conclusion. Kindness matters. Understanding matters. Patience matters. The willingness to listen matters. Without those things, relationships become fragile. Without those things, trust becomes difficult. Without those things, assumptions begin replacing truth. And your soulmate didn't want that in their life. Not anymore. Because your heart needs this right now, because the people we surround ourselves with influence the way we see the world. Your soulmate was becoming more selective about that influence. And listen to this. As midnight approached, they finally understood why the situation felt so significant. It wasn't because of one conversation. It wasn't because of one opinion. It wasn't because of one disagreement. It was because the conversation exposed a deeper pattern. A pattern they had overlooked before. A pattern they could no longer ignore. And once they saw it, everything started making sense. Certain past interactions. Certain comments. Certain attitudes. Certain behaviors. Pieces that once seemed unrelated now fit together perfectly. Because your heart needs this right now, because clarity often arrives all at once after a long period of confusion. Your soulmate was experiencing that clarity. And listen to this. The discovery left them thoughtful. Quiet. Reflective. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just certain. Certain that they wanted honesty in their life. Certain that they wanted authenticity in their life. Certain that they wanted people around them who valued understanding more than assumptions. And that certainty would soon lead them toward a major decision. A decision they hadn't expected to make when the day began. Because your heart needs this right now, because life-changing decisions often begin with small realizations. Your soulmate had just uncovered one of those realizations. And as they sat quietly reflecting before going to sleep, one final thought remained. The way people speak about others tells you a great deal about how they see the world. And once you truly see someone's perspective, it's impossible to pretend you didn't. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after everything your soulmate discovered, after all the reflection, all the questions, and all the realizations that surfaced during that unforgettable day, they finally reached a moment where a decision had to be made. Not a dramatic decision. Not an impulsive decision. A quiet decision. A thoughtful decision. A decision that came from understanding rather than emotion. And listen to this. The night felt different. The conversation was over. The voices were gone. The opinions had stopped. Yet the thoughts remained. The more your soulmate reflected on what happened, the more one realization continued growing stronger. People reveal themselves in unexpected ways. Not during perfect moments. Not during easy conversations. During moments when they think nobody is paying attention. Your soulmate had been paying attention. Very carefully. Because your heart needs this right now, because character often reveals itself in subtle ways long before it reveals itself in obvious ways. Your soulmate was finally seeing those subtle signs. And listen to this. At first, they questioned themselves. Maybe they were overthinking. Maybe they were reading too much into the situation. Maybe the conversation didn't mean what they thought it meant. They tried giving every possible benefit of the doubt. They tried finding alternative explanations. They tried seeing things from every angle. Because that's who they were. Someone who believed in fairness. Someone who believed in understanding. Someone who believed people deserved grace. But the more they reflected, the clearer things became. The problem wasn't one comment. The problem wasn't one opinion. The problem wasn't one misunderstanding. The problem was a pattern. And patterns are much harder to ignore. Because your heart needs this right now, because isolated moments can be misunderstood, but repeated patterns often reveal the truth. Your soulmate was beginning to recognize a pattern. And listen to this. They started remembering previous conversations. Previous interactions. Previous moments they had brushed aside. Things that seemed insignificant at the time. Yet now those moments looked different. Now they carried meaning. Now they connected. Now they formed a larger picture. A picture that was becoming impossible to ignore. And suddenly they realized something. This wasn't really about what was said about you. It was about the mindset behind it. The willingness to judge before understanding. The habit of assuming before listening. The tendency to speak confidently about things that weren't fully known. Those traits concerned your soulmate. Deeply. Because your heart needs this right now, because values matter more than opinions. Your soulmate cared about values. And listen to this. The more they thought about it, the more another truth appeared. Trust isn't built only through kindness. Trust is built through perspective. Through fairness. Through the way people treat others when there is nothing to gain. Through the way people speak about someone who isn't present. Those things matter. More than most people realize. Your soulmate understood that. And suddenly they found themselves asking an important question. If someone is willing to misunderstand others so easily, what happens when I'm the one being misunderstood? That question lingered. Because your heart needs this right now, because sometimes the questions we ask reveal the answers we already know. Your soulmate was discovering that answer. And listen to this. As midnight approached, they stopped focusing on the conversation itself. Instead, they focused on what they wanted in their life. The answer came surprisingly fast. They wanted honesty. They wanted authenticity. They wanted compassion. They wanted people who tried to understand before forming conclusions. People who valued truth more than assumptions. People who believed everyone deserved the opportunity to be fully seen. And once those values became clear, the decision became clear too. Because your heart needs this right now, because decisions become easier when our values become clearer. Your soulmate's values had never felt clearer. And listen to this. There was no argument. No dramatic confrontation. No explosive ending. Just quiet clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when someone realizes a connection no longer aligns with who they are becoming. The kind of clarity that feels sad and freeing at the same time. The kind of clarity that doesn't require anger. Only understanding. Your soulmate understood. And that understanding changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now, because maturity often means recognizing what belongs in our lives and what no longer does. Your soulmate was recognizing that. And listen to this. For a while, they felt conflicted. After all, letting go of any connection is rarely easy. Even when it's necessary. Even when it's healthy. Even when it's right. Part of them wished things were different. Part of them wished the conversation had gone another way. Part of them wished the realization had never happened. But wishes don't change reality. And reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Because your heart needs this right now, because growth sometimes requires difficult choices. Your soulmate was facing one of those choices. And listen to this. As the night grew quieter, they reflected on everything one last time. The conversation. The assumptions. The patterns. The realizations. The values. The lessons. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. They wanted relationships built on understanding. Not judgment. On curiosity. Not assumptions. On honesty. Not appearances. And once they accepted that truth, the decision felt inevitable. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace often arrives after we stop resisting what we already know. Your soulmate had stopped resisting. And listen to this. The decision wasn't really about ending something. It was about protecting something. Protecting their peace. Protecting their values. Protecting the kind of life they wanted to create. Protecting the environment they wanted around them. And suddenly the choice felt less like loss and more like growth. Because growth often requires creating space for healthier things to enter our lives. Your soulmate understood that now. And listen to this. Before finally going to sleep, one final realization settled into their heart. A realization that felt stronger than all the others. It was this. The people who truly belong in our lives don't rush to conclusions. They ask questions. They seek understanding. They look deeper. They value truth. And they remember that every person carries a story that deserves compassion. That thought stayed with them. And it continues staying with them now. Because your heart needs this right now, because the strongest connections are built on understanding, not assumptions. And your soulmate had finally learned that lesson. Don't skip. Listen carefully. This message is for you, and your heart needs this right now, because after all the conversations, all the reflection, all the realizations, and all the difficult decisions, your soulmate finally reached the moment where everything became clear. Not just clear enough to make a decision. Clear enough to understand why the decision mattered. And listen to this. For days, they kept thinking about everything that had happened. The words they heard. The attitudes they noticed. The assumptions they witnessed. The values they discovered. At first, they believed the situation was about one person. One conversation. One misunderstanding. But eventually they realized it was about something much bigger. It was about standards. Personal standards. Emotional standards. The standards that determine who gets access to our time, energy, and trust. Because your heart needs this right now, because every meaningful relationship is built upon standards, whether we realize it or not. Your soulmate was finally becoming aware of theirs. And listen to this. For a long time, they had been someone who gave people endless chances. They tried to understand everyone. They tried to see the good in everyone. They tried to overlook warning signs. Not because they were naive. Because they believed people could change. And they still believed that. But now they understood something important. Believing people can change doesn't mean ignoring who they are today. That realization felt powerful. Because suddenly they understood the difference between compassion and self-respect. Compassion allows us to understand others. Self-respect allows us to protect ourselves. And healthy relationships require both. Because your heart needs this right now, because kindness without boundaries often becomes exhaustion. Your soulmate had learned that lesson. And listen to this. As they reflected further, another realization appeared. The person they chose to distance themselves from wasn't necessarily a bad person. That wasn't the point. The point was alignment. Values. Perspective. The way they approached life. The way they treated people. The way they handled uncertainty. The way they responded when they didn't know the full story. Those things matter. More than most people realize. Because eventually, differences in values become impossible to ignore. Because your heart needs this right now, because relationships survive disagreement, but they struggle when core values no longer align. Your soulmate could finally see that clearly. And listen to this. The more they reflected, the more they realized something surprising. Walking away didn't make them feel angry. It made them feel peaceful. And that surprised them. Usually difficult decisions create doubt. Usually endings create confusion. Usually distance creates sadness. Yet this felt different. This felt like clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when a difficult decision finally aligns with your deepest values. Because your heart needs this right now, because peace is often the strongest confirmation that a decision was necessary. Your soulmate was experiencing that peace. And listen to this. One evening, while reflecting on everything one final time, they asked themselves a simple question. What is the biggest lesson I've learned from all of this? The answer arrived almost immediately. The lesson wasn't about the other person. The lesson wasn't about conflict. The lesson wasn't about disagreement. The lesson was about connection. Real connection. Authentic connection. The kind of connection that survives uncertainty because it is built on understanding. Because your heart needs this right now, because understanding is the foundation of every meaningful relationship. Your soulmate finally understood that. And listen to this. For years, they believed connection was mostly about compatibility. Shared interests. Shared goals. Shared experiences. Those things matter. But now they understood something deeper. Connection is also about how people handle differences. How they handle misunderstandings. How they handle incomplete information. How they handle uncertainty. The people who seek understanding create trust. The people who rush to conclusions create distance. That realization changed everything. Because your heart needs this right now, because character is revealed most clearly when certainty is unavailable. Your soulmate had witnessed character being revealed. And listen to this. The further they reflected, the more grateful they became. Not for the difficult conversation itself. For the lesson it revealed. Without that experience, they might never have noticed the pattern. Without that experience, they might never have examined their standards. Without that experience, they might never have realized how important understanding truly is. Sometimes difficult moments teach valuable lessons. Sometimes uncomfortable situations reveal important truths. And sometimes disappointment creates clarity. Because your heart needs this right now, because wisdom often arrives disguised as difficulty. Your soulmate had discovered wisdom. And listen to this. As the days passed, they stopped thinking about the situation with frustration. Instead, they viewed it with gratitude. Gratitude for the awareness. Gratitude for the growth. Gratitude for the opportunity to become more intentional about the people they allowed into their life. That shift changed everything. Because once gratitude enters the story, even difficult experiences begin serving a purpose. Your soulmate could finally see that purpose. And listen to this. The final truth they discovered was surprisingly simple. Simple enough to fit into a single sentence. Yet powerful enough to change the way they approached relationships forever. The truth was this. The right people try to understand before they judge. That's it. That's the lesson. That's the realization. That's what changed everything. The right people ask questions. The right people listen. The right people remain curious. The right people care enough to learn the full story. And those are the people worth keeping close. Because your heart needs this right now, because genuine connection is built on curiosity, compassion, and understanding. Your soulmate now knew exactly what they were looking for. And listen to this. When they looked back at the entire experience, they no longer saw a person they had cut off. They saw a lesson they had learned. A lesson about values. A lesson about trust. A lesson about connection. A lesson about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who seek truth instead of assumptions. And that lesson would stay with them for a very long time. Because some lessons don't just change a decision. They change a perspective. They change a future. They change a life. And this was one of those lessons. Because your heart needs this right now, because every experience teaches us something about what we deserve, what we value, and what we want to create in our lives. Your soulmate finally understood all three. And as they moved forward, one final thought stayed with them. Real connection isn't finding someone who agrees with everything. Real connection is finding people who care enough to understand. And once you experience that kind of understanding, you never want to settle for anything less.